All right, Nick, let's talk about the New Orleans Saints. When you're talking Saints, you're talking new coaching staff who we think has done a phenomenal job hiring so far. They're doing really, really good things. The next order of business is the quarterback position. We're talking Derek Carr. We're talking about what is his position with this team going forward. And there's a couple of different things we have today, a couple of different updates that are highlighting a bunch of interesting talking points about the quarterback position. I think Saints fans, you're going to want to hear these. It is very, very interesting moves going on in New Orleans. But before we get to that, I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I alluded to, some interesting stuff going, a couple different interesting things going on when regards to the quarterback position. Let's jump into the first one. I'll kind of talk about it very briefly and get straight into the second one as well. But getting into it, this first one is from over on SI.com. It says, with the NFL Combine here, teams have an opportunity to meet with top prospects, and New Orleans football's Nick Underhill reported on Thursday that the Saints have met with arguably the top quarterback in the draft class in Miami's Cam Ward. Interesting. Says don't really get into reporting on all of the meetings, but there's a notable one here, Underhill said. The Saints met with Cam Ward. The Saints meeting with Ward doesn't mean anything is going to happen necessarily, but is very interesting to hear. It's likely the Saints just doing their due diligence and speaking with the top players in this draft class, but still, and I will agree, it is very interesting that the Saints have talked to Cam Ward. That is now a possibility that's on their plate, and most people say, well, what about Derek Carr? They still have Derek Carr. They've been talking about Derek Carr. I think there's another under the radar point that we're going to get to right now that kind of alludes to Derek Carr and what other teams around the league are thinking about Derek Carr and his availability. This is over on X again at Benjamin Albright at Albright NFL. Really great reporter on those type of deals. And it says, well, there's still a lot in play there. The Rodgers dominoes has to fall, probably the Giants, although they're looking to take multiple swings. So they could do Rodgers and still trade up to number one. Talking about them trading for the number one overall pick, getting a quarterback. He says, and that's not done yet. That's not to say it won't get done, but it's certainly not done yet. The Steelers have had their eye on the Saints situation. They want to see if they can eventually do cut Carr, and if so, they're in. Go on and say there's also been interviewing quarterbacks here at the draft, so there's looking both ways. I think this is another very interesting point that the Steelers are thinking that Derek Carr is an option on the table. They have him penciled in as somebody they want to go after. So that says a lot as well. I've just gone through a lot of stuff, Nick. I know there's a lot to talk about. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this one. But Seahawks fans, you tell us what you think first in the comment section below on both matters. If they go and do something crazy and draft a quarterback in this draft, that obviously mean moving off of Derek Carr. Do you like Cam Ward? Is that the option that you want to go with? And then secondarily, do you want them to move off Derek Carr? Big cap hit, a lot of stuff going on. This team has to do some restructuring of things to be competitive. Do you think Derek Carr is part of that formula? Let us know what your thoughts are on all of this stuff in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, go ahead. We want to hear what you have to say on everything Saints here.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I think one of the more interesting things is there have been rumors and reports that the Tennessee Titans are looking to shop their number one overall draft pick, right? And I think this is an interesting thing the Saints find themselves in. Kellen Moore is coming in, and he's bringing in an entire vibe shift. That's one of the reasons you hire a young guy and more. We talked about they filled out a really good staff, but when you bring in a young head coach, you don't bring in a young, energetic guy to try and just kind of stick with the status quo, right? You're not if you wanted to just improve Derek Carr around the margins, you'd hire like a Gruden or something like that, or a Mike McCarthy, a guy that can maybe get Derek Carr maybe 5%, 10% better, and maybe that's good enough for this football team. When you bring in Kellen Moore, you're saying, I want to just change everything. We want to change our approach, change our structure. And the reality is Derek Carr is who Derek Carr is at this point, and his salary cap situation is what it is, and it's not good. So in 2025, he's got a cap hit of 51.5 million bucks. That's huge. In 2026, it's 61.5, and then he goes into 3 void years on the other side of that. So he basically has 2 years left on his deal. before he becomes a free agent. In both those years, it averages out to be about 56 million bucks in salary cap hit. His 2024 over the cap valuation is only $14 million. That's really low. Now, granted, he missed a lot of time due to injury, so the real, if he had played the entire season, was probably closer to that 30, 35 million margin if you look at his valuation. But that's still a massive overpay for a guy who's 34 years old, a guy who's starting to get more banged up, a guy who we know who the ceiling is. So I think this is an interesting situation the Saints are in. I think a lot of people, when Mickey Loomis said we're sticking with Derek Carr as our QB1, said, yeah, you're probably not. And I think I disagree. I think I agree with those other people. I disagree with Mickey Loomis. I think he wanted to say a public statement, right, to not make it look like they were shopping Derek Carr. But I think behind the scenes, they're probably discussing options because if they designate him a post June 1st release, which is just a contract designation, or trade him as such, the Saints would actually save $30 million in cap space, which would be a huge move for New Orleans. So let's talk about teams that would be interested. Obviously, we know the Pittsburgh Steelers would be, but the reality is no team is going to give up a lot of capital for a Derek Carr trade. So I think a release of Derek Carr and then potentially a trade with the Tennessee Titans up to number one to get Cam Ward is a very viable scenario. And if you're a Saints fan, I know there's a little bit of consternation about this, but the reality is you need to reset this organization. Since the Drew Brees retirement, and this is where the Saints and the Steelers, I think, are very similar stylistically, both teams, since Drew Brees and Ben Roethlisberger retired, have struggled to find the next guy. And you need the next guy. Until you find the next guy, you're just spinning your wheels, right? Do you want Derek Carr to get 2% better and this team to get 5% better? Maybe they do. Maybe they win 9 games and 10 games, and when they win the NFC South and they're like the Buccaneers, maybe win one playoff game, probably not, and they get ousted and then try and run it all back again. Is that the model you want to follow? Or do you want to compete for championships, right? Derek Carr's not taking to championships. He is a B to B minus quarterback, especially when you consider his injuries. He's good enough to take you to the playoffs. He's good enough to win you some playoff games, but he's not at that elite tier. Frankly, he's not even at the very good tier of quarterbacks, right? And so you need to get someone at that level. I think what we're going to see over the coming weeks with the New Orleans Saints is they're going to be evaluating getting a quarterback in the draft. The problem is there's only two guys that are considered first round picks. That's Ward and Shadur Sanders. So the question for the Saints, and this is the question I'll throw back on you, Mize, is what position do you move up to take one of these guys if you think it's the right move to do, which I think it is.
I, I think it's an interesting one because you are in a catch-22 situation here. Anyone ahead of you as far as the draft could theoretically take a quarterback. But with the Saints, the good news is you are hearing these quarterbacks are sliding down draft boards quite aggressively lately. I've seen, rumors, and I know we're talking Cam Ward is the quarterback here, but just in generally speaking, Shooter Sanders has dropped to mid round. We've seen him like 13, 16 range in some mock drafts. I don't think he's going to go that low, but just to say he has slid down dramatically. I think Cam Ward, he's no longer the surefire number one overall guy. I think, even talking to other teams, like they say, the Giants here, they might be going Aaron Rodgers. The Steelers may be going Aaron Rodgers. Who knows where he's going to go? There's a lot of teams that are at the top of the draft board that are considering other options, which gives you more information that these guys could slide. I think if you can get in for a reasonable dollar amount just outside of the top three, I'd say 4, 5, 6, somewhere around there. There's a couple teams I think want to trade in that range. I think that's as high as I'd go. I think trading up to like 1, 2, 3, I think that's going to be a lot of cap, draft capital, not cap, but a lot of draft capital that you're going to have to spend to get one of these quarterbacks that everyone else is letting slide. I think there's reason to believe that they're not 100% the sure thing. Some of them are very good, and I think that they could be viable options for this team. But I think that you kind of just got to hedge your bets. If you want to go, you wait, you get some deals on the table, and if around 4, 5, 6, if there's 2 guys left at 4, maybe you wait till 5 or 6 to trade up. If there's only 1 guy left at 4, trade up to 4 to try to get one of these guys. I don't think you move into the top 3, though, because I think that's going to be a lot of draft capital to spend to get one of these guys.
So let's break down what it costs to move up into that range, right? And we're just going to look at, I think the closest analogous example is the 2016 NFL draft when the Philadelphia Eagles, sitting at number 8, traded with the Cleveland Browns up to number 2 to select Carson Wentz. The Saints sit at number 9, so moving up to number 1 is roughly the same order of magnitude. So Obviously, the Eagles got the number 2 overall pick. They gave up their number 8 overall pick, a third round pick, a fourth round pick, their following year's first round pick, and 2 years later, their second round pick. So it is a lot, like you said. Now, all that being said, it worked out for the Philadelphia Eagles, right? Now, Carson Wentz didn't work out, but it allowed them to at least take the opportunity. They had a couple good years, and it gave them the chance to then draft Jalen Hurts in the second round. And then everything obviously snowballed from there, of course. The question you have to ask yourself as a Saints fan is, and I think this is what the Saints organization is asking themselves, is what are we willing to give up to get the long-term answer at the quarterback position? And I think that's one of the things teams like the Chiefs and the Eagles really do a great job answering. And I think Colin Cowherd, the longtime commentator on Fox Sports, and he was on ESPN for a while as well, I think he has a great way of saying this. It's like, listen, unless you have one of the top 4 or 5 guys, you should be evaluating, drafting, bringing in young quarterbacks every single year, right? Because if you don't have that guy, that special guy, that Jackson, that Mahomes, that Josh Allen, right? If you don't have that guy, you are going to struggle. You need to get the roster perfect, right? You can win without those guys. You look at the Eagles and the 49ers, but you need to have darn good rosters and you need to find steals on both sides of the football. And even then, it's not a guaranteed success. The Eagles were 1-2 in Super Bowls. The 49ers have been 0-2 over this stretch, right? No guarantee of success. You need to find that elite level quarterback, the guy that can break the rules of the defense, or you need to get the roster perfect. And Saints fans, let me ask you this. You think Mickey Loomis is the guy to make this roster perfect? I think he's a solid GM. I know some people really hate him. I don't think he's absolutely terrible, but I don't think he's on the level of a Roseman or a Veach or even a Bell Belichick. If you go back to his time with the Patriots, I think he's a B minus GM. So he's not the guy, in my opinion, nothing against Mickey Loomis, to take the Saints roster to the level of what we saw the Eagles and the 49ers, the Eagles this past season, the 49ers for a number of years. What does that mean then? It means you need think that's the problem the Saints have to address. So the question again is, what are you willing to give up to get that guy? Are you willing to give up 2 number 1s, a second, a third, and fourth over a 3-year window to get your guy? I think that's not unreasonable considering if you don't get your guy, you're going to be stuck going 7 wins, 8 wins for the next 10 years, right? The Drew Brees signing is the greatest free agency signing in NFL history. That just doesn't happen, right? You don't get a Hall of Fame, first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the all time great quarterbacks to sign for a relatively cheap deal in free agency in the peak of his career. It just doesn't happen, right? There's a reason that move is the greatest signing of all time. The Saints cannot and should not rely on another situation like that to fall into their lap. They have to be proactive, in my opinion. Now, look, they have to make the decision whether that's enough capital to give up, and maybe the Titans want to ask for even more, right? If the Titans are really tough, that makes it harder. But the reality is, you need to figure out who your answer is at the long-term quarterback. I think Ward is a good option. I think Shadur Sanders would not be a bad option, and maybe you punt to next year, right? If that's the case, then what do you do if you're the Saints? You trade back this year and pick up a lot of capital to make moves in 2026, that draft class. And this is my final question, Miles. I will throw over to you. I am all in on the Saints finding their franchise guy through the draft, either this year or the next. That's the deadline. But I'm curious what your thoughts are. Do you think they should go that route, or do you think there's a quarterback that maybe will be available, or you think the Saints should go after free agency or trade wise this year or next to find their answer?
Yeah, I like what you say,
Or
and then
Spencer Rattler, the answer. I guess that's the other thing we haven't talked about.
that isn't another interesting point, but I do think a lot of people are saying, well, I don't know. But I think what you say here is Derek Carr. I don't think he's on the table anymore. I don't think he's the answer. When we're talking about veteran quarterbacks, you give a guy 2 years, you're going to know whether he's going to be able to make it happen or not, regardless of who the new coach is, who the new offense coordinator is, what system it's in. Derek Carr, you know what you get with Derek Carr. You get a guy who's average, has injury concerns. You're paying him $50 million, a lot of money, too much money for Derek Carr. I think you need to move off of him. And I do like what you say because this is my favorite example of a team that I think did the quarterback thing the right way. Obviously, they haven't got the results from it at all. But you look at the Arizona Cardinals. They get Josh Rosen at number 10. That's a high draft capital to spend on a quarterback. They go pick him at 10. They immediately suck again. And they're like, all right, well, this isn't the right move. And they throw it away and go number 1 overall and pick Kyler Murray. Now, Kyler Murray, there's stuff that you can say about him. I don't know if he is like the guy for them, but he's at least good. He graded out 11th per PFF last year. He's got a lot of great skills. I think he brings a lot to the table. I think the team's dysfunctional as a whole. And that has a lot to do with it. So the Cardinals, not a great example in developing the guys, but going after the guys aggressively. I think the Cardinals did a very good job saying, "Hey, Josh Rosen, you're not the guy. We spent draft capital on you. We're not afraid that we got to spend money to make money." Kind of thought process here. We're gonna dump you off, get whatever they got, like second round pick, something like that for him. Go on to Kyler Murray. I think that's what they need to do. I think they need to dump Derek Carr, either let Spencer Rattler be a guy and get someone like late in the draft as a backup quarterback, or they need to go and spend the draft capital and get one of these guys that's falling, pick up a Cam Ward, pick up a Shador Sanders, and bring them in. And then next year, there's a lot of great options at quarterback coming in. And then the year after that, there's going to be some more good quarterbacks coming in as well. I think you need to not be afraid to say, okay, if these guys aren't working, we still need to take another shot at the quarterback positions. Because like you said Pittsburgh Steelers, you said, well, even the Saints in the same situation. When you don't have your guy, you should be willing to give up everything to get your guy. You have to go and get your guy. Otherwise, you're going to be in the situation that you are in, the situation the Steelers in, and it's not a fun situation to be in. You say, well, you look at the Steelers. Oh, they got great defense. They've got some good skill position players, but the quarterback position sucks so much they aren't able to be competitive in the playoff. They aren't able to be a threat to anybody. And that's a really bad situation to be in. You got guys like TJ Watt, generational talent, coming in here, having great seasons, but you're like, well, if they had the quarterback, you don't want to say those, well, if we would have just done this, we could have done that. You want to make the moves and do whatever kind of, if it's trading up twice this year, next year, the year after that, whatever you got to do to get the quarterback right, I think that's the right move for the Saints.